Dr. Mulder, the world is shocked by gruesome murders of our farmers in South Africa. Apparently it's the most dangerous profession in the world, even more dangerous than a policeman. So what actually happens there? How can you explain this escalation of the situation?
The problem is that there's a radicalization in South Africa between the different communities, and very unthoughtful and inciting things are being said by politicians. We've had one of the ANC senior people singing a song, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." We had to go to court to have that declared illegal, but it's sometimes still used. We've got a president who sometimes sings, "Bring my machine gun." So those kind of inciting things are being said, and then I believe they incite some people, young people and others. And if you talk to the police, it's not a question of crime, it's not a question of robbery. You don't go to a farm, break into the farmhouse, sit and wait for 5-6 hours until the farmer and his wife returns from town or from church, and then you kill them and you leave without taking anything. That's not crime, that's not robbery. That is the beginning of murder, it's genocide, it's killing people and trying to wipe them out. And we believe it's part of a strategy that is being used to basically scare the white community to a certain extent, drive people off their land, and eventually drive them out of South Africa. And the irony is that the South African media plays it very low key. We do not get them involved. And that's where we are going.
Dr. Mulder, is that Marxism in its Leninist form? Is it something similar to Red Terror, revolutionaries exercised in Russia? Kill wealthy, kill the farmers who, because to be wealthy is a crime. So is it this primitive form of Marxism, you think?
Absolutely, I've got no doubt about that. After communism failed in the Soviet Union, it's alive and well in South Africa. We've got a very active South African Communist Party who's an ally of the government, and they support the government, and they were very much supporting Cyril Ramaphosa in his campaign to get elected. And obviously they will now come after he's elected to try and get what they want to achieve. So you're absolutely correct. It's a strategy that's been formed, and it's a basic Marxist-Leninist kind of approach by trying to enforce and scare and have that kind of effect on the white population in general. And once, if you kill a farmer, you kill the farm stops to produce, the poor laborers on that farm loses their jobs, and the whole thing just basically implodes. It's part of a strategy basically to drive people out, and with that goes a whole notion of so-called white monopoly capital. It's also part of that strategy basically to put a question mark in terms of what's been done in South Africa in the past to build the country to where it was.
Ramaphosa, new leader of ANC, would like to nationalize land and banks. So is it part of this strategy, this Marxist strategy? And how? What are the results? What is the fruit of this action if the people who feed the nation are the white farmers?
Absolutely. The ANC, basically a group that broke away from the ANC was the ANC's Youth League, with Malema, who is basically their leader. He then formed a new little party called the EFF, Economic Freedom Fighters. And they've got all these things as their policies, confiscation of land, nationalism of the banks, etc., etc. The ANC basically trying to, because of that, move to the left, and they're also now exposing those specific policy statements. And at their conference in December, they've taken certain resolutions to implement exactly that. So Ramaphosa, although he's now the president of the ANC, in terms of policy decisions, will have to implement nationalization of the Reserve Bank, confiscation of land without compensation. And that's part of that kind of strategy. Now, if you do that, as it is already at the moment, South Africa is not performing economically. Our economic growth is dismal. We've got a huge amount of people that are out of jobs. How on earth do you think you're going to get the economy to grow and to feed the people if you do that? And then obviously, the ANC must understand the people who own land will not voluntarily just give up their land. It's not true. It's also another lie and another myth that land was stolen by anybody. That's not the truth. People work for what they've got, and they work very hard.
South Africa has layers of immigration, and inclusive African immigration, because Bushmen, they are original people there, but there are plenty of others. So basically it is a rainbow nation in the sense that it's multinational environment. So how do you explain that, like 30 years after, there are still these gender implications for white men, for example, that there's all this positive discrimination, etc., etc. So isn't it a time for country to move on?
It's absolutely a time to move on. The problem with the ANC is this, and I've said to them on many occasions, They will never succeed because they are facing the future with their faces turned to the past. They are focusing on the past and they're not positively planning for the future at all. Now, me as a white person, where do I come from? My family went to Africa in 1685. We've been there for 333 years. That's long before most Americans or Australians or whatever went to their countries. I'm an African and I'm not going to be chucked out or chased out by anybody else. That is my country and my place. But now what the ANC is basically doing, they failed to produce, they failed to be successful, and you've got to blame somebody. And now they are blaming obviously the previous government, and they blame the previous people out there. What about our children? My children are young, they were born mostly after 1994. They are being discriminated against because they are white. So how do you think you're going to take South Africa forward with those kind of policies and those kind of approaches? ANC is playing a very dangerous game which in the end may cause their downfall.
Do you think that your country can become like second Zimbabwe? So what is happening politically in terms of constitution? What are the political movements? Because the signals we receive here are very contradictory.
Absolutely, it is absolutely contradictory. Just imagine, Ramaphosa, who's been elected now, says on behalf of the ANC that he supports the notion of confiscation of land without compensation. He supports the notion of nationalization of the Reserve Bank. And then he goes to Davos and says, I ask the world to come and invest. Why would you invest in a country where you run the risk that your property may be nationalized without compensation? And that's typically the ANC. So he's saying the things that his party has decided, and he knows he has got to say them. But the proof will be, what is he going to do in terms of his leadership? And we will be watching that very closely. If he goes that route and he implements those kind of decisions and those kind of policies, South Africa will go down the route of Zimbabwe, and it will not be a peaceful process, because obviously we will not just accept that our property be taken in a communist-Leninist way. There will be a civil war. There's no doubt about that. So if the ANC is realistic and Mr. Ramaphosa wants to be successful, we should do what is necessary in terms of the right policies and the right decisions economically. Then we can prosper, then we can grow, then you can create a future. It's up to him to give leadership. The last 10 years under Zuma, we had no leadership whatsoever, and because of that, corruption was rampant, people did exactly what they did, and crime also.
Cyril Ramaphosa at Davos, do you think any of the leaders dare to talk about farm murders to him, or you think there is kind of complicity, because many politicians call it a silent genocide what's going on, but still politically there is a huge pressure, because for example many journalists told me that they don't dare to touch the subject because they're afraid to be dubbed as racists.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct, but the tragedy is this. It's not only white farmers that are murdered. There are some black farmers murdered as well. There are farm workers that are murdered that are black people, because that's part of a strategy to clear the land in terms of getting the population of the land and to move other people in and move friends and benefits, those kind of things. But the point is, because we come from the past that we've been the last couple of years, it's time that some leaders will stand up and say this is enough. And at the moment we have not seen that, and people are so scared to say anything negative towards the ANC that they don't do that. But if they are serious in terms of their plight and in terms of what they believe in terms of human rights, they can no longer keep quiet. Definitely not.